Well, hello, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here today with you. It's really truly an honor and a pleasure. I want to start by saying that I have some stage fright, so bear with me. I promise this won't be too long, but perhaps boring. And I want to say also thank you to Director Francisco Rodriguez Suarez for being here today, and of course to Dr. Benjamin Bross also to be having invited me to participate in this talk today. And I want to acknowledge the presence of my colleague, John Siddle, the director of the Cranach Museum. So I was invited to give a talk as Benji, as we all call him, said regarding what brought me to be an architect and what how architecture has shaped my professional life, if not my life. I want to start by telling you that I was born in Mexico City, and I come just from a very ordinary middle class family. My father was the first one in his family to go to have a college degree. My mother had a technical degree in accounting, and she worked until she married my father and became stay-at-home mother. I have an older brother who is a medical doctor. He's a specialist in spine and enlargement and bone and those things. All of them were avid readers in my family, and I was a little later than them. Improved a little later, but I had to. Oh, and but I was exposed to cultural experiences very early in my life, which let me see, yeah, which actually comes from being raised in a rather cosmopolitan town like Mexico. Uh, Mexico is a quite interesting city. It's a strange mix between tradition and innovation. And it's the oldest major city in the Americas. It's over 600 years old. And it's a play of many firsts. You know, we had the first cathedral, and we had the first university, and the first arts academy in the continent. And also, we had the first Olympic Games in this century that happened after the reinstall of the Games in Rome at the end of the Second World War, and twice the Soccer World Cup. And we have a lot of firsts, you know. And so becoming an architect was sort of a natural one decision. My family traveled all the time, and it was our habit to visit every historical site, every monument, every cathedral, every archaeological site, museums. And this, I guess, came from what was the foundation of the public education in Mexico, that was to develop this sense of pride, nationalistic pride for your, that came from learning about your traditions and learning about art and whether it was high or low. And by 1964, the government focused in making Mexico a modern country. It was sort of a celebration after the accomplishments that the country had made about what was called the Great Development. And it happened before with great results. We see here on this slide the view of Paseo de la Reforma. I don't know if any one of you have been to Mexico, but it's a very impressive avenue. And it was designed around the turn of the century when every city in Mexico wanted to be like Paris. And there were all these amazing constructions being done all over, and with extraordinary buildings with great artistic qualities. And we can see here what is the Paseo de la Reforma, which a lot of people say it competes with the beauty of Champs-Élysées. But there were other constructions that were also quite impressive, you know, like the Palacio de Villasartes, which originally was designed at the turn of the century by Adamo Boari, Italian architect, stopped through the revolution in 1914 and was retaken by Federico Mariscal and reopened in 34. And you can see this gorgeous Art Deco building where you also can look at the murals that decorate the building. But at the time of the 60s, Mexico was really transforming its character. It was trying to be innovative, and it tried to stop following what was the models of other places. And suddenly what Le Corbusier could not accomplish in Europe to the scale of his ambitions, like the Cité Religieuse in Marseille, was happening in Mexico City. There was these gigantic projects, housing projects were built like Nonoalco, Tlatelolco. And if you want to think about it, you know, the La Unidad Marseille compromises 337 units for 12 over 12-story buildings. These had 102 buildings hosting almost 12,000 apartments for 70,000 people. It had 19 schools from all grades, from K to 12 to high school. And it had a shopping center, it had theaters, it had cinema, all kind of services. And this was designed by Mario Pani, and along with Luis Barragan and Max Cheto, but they were always also designing other kind of developments. And the city was growing with these master plans of urbanism, expanding north and south with places like Pedregal de San Ángel and Ciudad Satélite. And we see here a couple of examples of those houses. On your right, you see this advertising that was done to promote this place, and it's still a fascinating place all over the lab of the volcanoes and the cuspid of Mexican modernism. And but by 1952, the largest of the complex was done, which was the campus of Mexico City Autónoma, Universidad Autónoma. And this was designed, the original plan by Mario Pani and Enrique del Moral, and it enclosed Olympic Stadium that you can see there, about 40 faculties, about 5 museums, the Central Library and Ecological Reserve. I mean, it's a huge campus that hosts over several 100,000 students a day. And it was, the whole idea was also to present not only modernism, but what was called the integración plástica, the plastic integration, where all buildings had to have what would be the latest version of muralism, which had brought Mexico to the forefront of the arts at the beginning of the decade of the 20s. And you see here an example of the library designed by Juan O'Gorman, which is all covered in these really tiny tiles, creating the most spectacular building. And or Siqueiros, David Alfaro Siqueiros, who did this, what was called a sculpture picture, escultopintura, sculpture painting. And Siqueiros was one of the most important muralism. He actually started doing great work in the United States, but being a communist, most of it was destroyed. And it started in the 20s, painting in LA, and then work in New York, created an art studio where Jackson Pollock learned from him about action painting. And we see another example. This is the Faculty of Medicine. And unfortunately, my title covers a little, you can see all these ramps and how it was influenced by the spirit of Le Corbusier. And there were many things happening at the time. And I'm just trying to frame what I was seeing before I decided to become an architect. Design was blooming, and we had significant figures like Spradling. William Spradling was actually originally from the United States, moving to Tasco in the 1930s, and became one of the most important silver designer, creating an industry that hired over 500 artisans. And his work had to become really massive because it was sold through the catalogs of Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue. And actually later, Henri de Anoncourt, who was the founder of Museum of Modern Art, asked him to try to replicate this after the end of the Second World War in Alaska, which unfortunately did not happen as well, using artisans from there. But there were also other great figures like Clara Porcet, who was a Cuban designer who studied in the United States, in the Bauhaus in Europe. And nowadays, if you look at auction houses, you will see that her furniture is perhaps one of the most desired and expensive one in the market. She created these exclusive, unique pieces, but then they transform into this mass production by another company, the Van Buren furniture, that was exported all over, and it was all inspired in materials from Mexico, and creating a very unique development of Mexican modernism. Design, as I said, was blooming by 1968. We had the Olympics, and you can see here how the graphics were applied for announcing the venues of the event, or even the dresses that the hostess were wearing. And this is a fabulous design that later became very much an icon. And the city transformed at the time. For the first time, we had a subway, and you can see the original, one of the central stations, how it looked then on your right, and then how it looks today on your left, and how it was transforming, because in order to create this big plaza, a lot of blocks of buildings, housing had to be turned down, and it really reshaped the face of the city. And I could go on and on trying to remember about those things as I was young. But the one thing that I want to remember is that I experienced what filling the space was long before I knew I was going to be an architect. And these are the famous satellite towers designed by Matthias Geritz and Luis Barragan. And they are these odd, minimalistic, monumental sculpture, huge in scale and full of color. And I kind of felt that there was something that was pushing me into going to the architectural school. And when I went there, it opened totally my eyes, and slowly understood that it was not just a creative process where being talented, creative, and visionary was enough to succeed. It was a hard discipline which required many different skills. And I'm sure that you all are learning about that hard discipline. Of course, training opened many doors, and understanding from the essential basic notion of what the intimate space and how human experience it, it may be always different, and with a diverse array of options. For the highly private introverts, of those that like to close small spaces, to the overexposed extroverts, from the basic living cell to the planning of cities and nations. There were no computers at the time, and AutoCAD was absolutely out of the landscape. So we had to do everything by drawing by hand and using a rule and ink, and it was rather complicated. But the one thing is that when I started studying, there were all these trends, you know. And on one hand, the architects that somehow I admire were the called the New York Five, the Whites, better known as the Whites, and and then on the other side, these were following passionately Le Corbusier, and they were largely criticized by that. But on the other side, we had the Greys. You know, this is the first one, of course, was Richard Mayer. This is a house, the Rachowski house, which has been it's one of the largest collectors of contemporary art in Dallas. And then this is the Richard Myers, the Getty Center in LA, which are both fabulous examples of their practices. But then on the other side, we had the Greys, you know, and with the Greys, we had Romando Giurgo, Charles Moore, Alan Greenberg, and Robert Venturi, and Robert Stern. And they were looking at classicism as a way to reimagine architecture and criticizing modernism for its austerity and for not expanding on traditions. And this led into postmodernism that was very much was the leading trend at the time that I was training. But not everything was, this is Charles Moore's the Piazza d'Italia in New Orleans, and but nothing was just white and gray or white and black. There was also color, and there was this architect in Mexico, Luis Barragan, who had after graduating in the 20s, he went to Spain and he studied the Moorish architecture. And he learned about light and contrast and shadows and volume. And he was, of course, one of the other major influences. So there I was split between the whites, the grays, the blues, the colors, and it all kind of came together at a moment. You know, the second part of the century was split between fear and hope. You know, there was the fear about the hecatomb during the Cold War, and we learned how to crawl and hide in case of an atomic bombing. And then there was also the hope that things would change and that there would be a bright future. And that's what a lot of architects were betting on and were doing things. So one of the things that suddenly we saw were the emergence of these fantastic cities. And by 1952, by 1960, Brasilia was opened. It was constructed in the middle of nowhere, and there's a rising star. Oscar Niemeyer was doing this absolutely futuristic buildings, collaborating with Lucio Costa as an urbanist planner, and with Roberto Burle Marx as landscaper. And Burle Marx also did this amazing transformation of Copacabana, and you would see how they gained they gained enlarged the beach to be able to design this paseo, which was absolutely an icon of urbanism in the 60s. So I suddenly was a young architect that was being fed by all these influences, and I wanted to be an urbanist, and I decided I was going to go to Sao Paulo. I applied. I was admitted at the university because I was interested in urbanism, mostly, I would think, at the time. And then suddenly I had an epiphany. You know, one day someone came, sat in front of me, presented all these fabulous slides about, again, monuments, you know, and I reminded myself of what I really liked. And I needed to work with them in order to graduate in Mexico. You had to do work for the state for 6 months and a full job. barely paid, that was called the social service. And I did my social service with Bellas Artes working for the Department of Monuments. I was very lucky. As I finished my internship, I was hired. And I don't know if I should say I was lucky. Within a year, my boss passed away. Oops. That tells me that I probably should start telling stories. And and he passed away, so I got his job. That was kind of gross, but you know, I didn't have to do with that. I promise. But but then I realized that that I wanted to train myself better. I went to try to get a master in conservation of monuments restoration. A year in with a 2-year programs, I found that I wasn't getting what I needed. I was being taught about how you practically can preserve a building, but I really wasn't learning who lived there, what was the significance of those spaces, why those buildings existed in order to really bring them back to life. So I decided to move to art history and did a master in art history, focus on specializing in architecture, and my plan was to have a PhD done on architecture and come back to the field. But suddenly I discovered something different, and I discovered that art history provided me the opportunity of understanding architecture differently. And maybe this is too silly to say, but I realized that architecture captures a moment in time that reflects exactly what society is. And this is what I think that for us is something that should feed our practice, and we should always have in the top of mind about whatever we do is gonna reflect the desires, the needs, the power behind of a moment in history. And that was maybe a dumb revelation, but for me it was a revelation. And doing studying art history and studying architecture and monuments, it's only started doing exhibitions. I didn't even know that I was going to be a curator. And very quickly, from graduating in 1980 and getting this job in the Department of Architecture in the Ministry of Culture, 10 years later, I had become an up and going young curator who suddenly became a director. And by 1991, I was running the Museum of Modern Art in Mexico City. And from there on, architecture had fed my practice. And I had the opportunity of working with other architects. But although I have to complain and say, I actually never built or anything of my own. I had done what is I would call ephemeral architecture over these past 30 plus years. I have designed hundreds of exhibitions, hundreds of spaces, and I have had the privilege of working also with major designers like Shohei Shigematsu of OMA, of the Kohlhaas Studio in New York, that we worked together to design this exhibition called From Paris to the World about Christian Dior. But I'm showing these slides because I want you to have a sense about how, what is the clean white box of a museum can be transformed into something completely magical and different. This is what we call the barrel vault, and it's inspired on actually Vargan's architecture, and suddenly it becomes like a tunnel where the installation of all these outfits transform the space. I'm working right now with Liz Diller from Diller Scofidio and Renfro in the design of the exhibition that we will soon open. And I wish I could show you some slides, but we're just on the process of construction, and it will open on May 9. But I can tell you this absolutely fascinating architectural project. And I have been able to build other buildings, from scratch. by 1999, I went to Argentina to be the founding director of a museum called Malva, Museo de Arte Latinoamericano de Buenos Aires. And you can see here an internal view of the space. And I guess that you can tell also some of the things that I really like that kind of reflect here, and work with these very young architects on a group after an international context that was selected for 3 young international upcoming architects from Buenos Aires. Although Philip Johnson had participated in the context, and even Frank Stella, and quite a good number of very important studios. And in Puerto Rico, I worked for several years at the Museo de Arte de Ponce, and you're seeing here a building by Edward Durrell Stone, who during the 50s, 60s, he was the larger number of producer of buildings for museums in the United States. I think he did something like 70 museums. And this was one of the gorgeous examples. He did this before he built the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. And you can see how he was already trying these big cantilevers and the high ceilings. And the museum was done in 1964. We reopened in 2010 with this. The museum completely rebuilt. We turned down everything inside, we did it completely, and worked with a very talented architects, with Federico Vares, which I just happily learned, and Brigida Hogan. I just happily learned that Federico is actually teaching here. And if you're taking a class with him, you're really lucky. He's a fantastic architect. And so I had the opportunity of, or you can see also on the left side, this fabulous Liechtenstein sculpture that we use to sign out the museum as its transformation. And this little pavilion that didn't exist, and the ramps to make it accessible, was part of the additions, plus another building that doubled its size. So I have to say that my practice as an architect has been on dealing and working with other architects, because I have other projects, renovation of Palacio de Villasartes in Mexico, and now I'm starting on the search for a new architect for the Dallas Museum of Art, which is already one of the 10 largest institutions in the United States. And we're gonna grow and transform ourselves. And we're starting with the search for what hopefully will be the new iteration of the museum in the years to come. And I'll stop here. It's probably a long story about a life, but being an architect has enabled me to do what I do today, to work as a museum director in a different probably manner than my colleagues that come just strictly from the field of art history. So I thank you for your patience, and I'm here to talk now with Benjamin. Thank you.